And it's interesting, I thought about coming over to St. Simon's as a young person back at this time when I was 12 and 13 years old. We would hitchhike over to St. Simon's and camp out in the woods that are what are now the Sinclair subdivision and some of the subdivisions on the north end of the island. So that was a time when St. Simon's probably only had 2,000 population compared to probably 15,000 now. So there was really nothing. In fact, Frederica Road at that time was a shell road from where Sea Island Road is now to the north end of the island. So it was a different time. We'd hitchhike over and sometimes have to wait 5 or 10 minutes for a car to come along, if you can imagine that, to get a ride. But you never had a problem getting a ride because it was just a small, friendly place at the time. So those were my first memories of the beauty of this area, and I took that with me even after I moved to Atlanta and spent some time away in college and the Navy. Right. Yeah, there's no question that this is a special place, and I think that's what's been so special about the response to the Land Trust is the natural beauty of the area is something that sinks in if you ever experience it. And when Jimmy Carter was president, as you remember, that was in 76, that's when the area was really discovered, and we began to sort of reach a kind of a hyper growth period. Sea Palms was developed. There were some beginnings of some mid-rise condominium projects down on the ocean, something we'd never seen before. So we began to feel some development pressures then, where I was invited to meet with groups that were concerned about the growth of St. Simon's. And I would tell them at the time that we need planning, we need zoning. I said, but if we're going to really affect in a meaningful way the development on St. Simon's, we ought to get together and buy some of this land and create a park system, because that's the best way to preserve it. Talked to some friends of mine, Francis McCrary and Jim and Jeannie Manning. I was involved in some of them were interested in various activities that I was interested in. So we invited them down, some members of the Land Trust from Charleston, just to talk with us about how you start a land trust and some do's and don'ts. And so the conversations really went on for probably 2 or 3 years, just periodically meeting and talking about it and trying to garner support. So we didn't really officially get into operation until 2000, and we actually started as a subsidiary, if you will, of the Coastal Georgia Land Trust, which was headquartered in Savannah at the time. It soon became clear that St. Simon's is a unique issue in some respects, in that it's a discrete area, or an island roughly the size of Manhattan. We looked at that and said, how can we work within those constraints as to the high cost of land and being able to acquire it? And one way is to, of course, to go to willing landowners and have them agree to protect their land just out of their own individual motivations, both from an estate planning standpoint or just for their love of St. Simon's. They enjoy the opportunity to get out and enjoy the outdoors on St. Simon's on a bicycle or walking, and so that's one reason we developed our master trail plan for St. Simon's. We built over $2.5 million in trails on St. Simon's with private philanthropy. I think the county only put $250,000 in that whole $2.6 million investment. And that was certainly a clear indication of interest. They were concerned about traffic, and that's one reason that we have emphasized the acquisition of properties on the north end of the island, realizing that if you build 4,000 or 5,000 houses on the north end, the impact on Frederica Road and some of our principal arteries would be overwhelming. And so, having been involved in a lot of different civic activities over the years, I don't know of any activity I've ever seen where there was more spontaneous support. I mean, I think people were hungry for something positive that they could contribute to. And so that's why our first project was the Chevron station, which is at the roundabout near the airport. That was an abandoned Chevron station. And so we got together and raised $850,000 to acquire that and then remove the tanks and create a nice little pocket park. I think at that time we picked up something like 800 members of the land trust just during that period. So it was something visible and that people could ride by every day and see where their money was going. So that really helped to get us off to a great start. We were very fortunate when we first started. We had no budget, so we were fortunate that Francis McCrary's daughter, Catherine Main, came on as our part-time executive director. So we had a half an employee, and Catherine was just an extraordinary person. She had a background in ecology and a love for the island, to say the least, having grown up here. I think some people thought we were anti-development. And we probably had some builders that were skeptical of what we were trying to do, but I hope as time went on they saw that we're not there to coerce property owners, that we want to work with property owners. And that's a big part of what the land trust is, to try to educate landowners as to how they can preserve their property and still retain some value in it. Well, I've probably hands down is what led to the John Gilbert Nature Trail. Again, I was still in banking at the time, and I got a call from the late Mrs. Dorothy Gilbert. And Mrs. Gilbert had some property adjacent to where they lived on Frederica Road. It was about 40-something acres. And she was actually, while she was on the phone with me, looking at a conceptual plan that they were considering to sell this for a development. I assume it would have been 40 or 50 homes. And she said, Ben, I just don't want to do this. She said, would the land trust accept this? And she made an outright gift of that property. I mean, it's just a very inspirational time. Someone, again, who loved the island, loved the oak tree that existed there. It's now called John's Oak for her late husband. And that was just a very inspiring time. Probably had a value of excess of $2 million, and she made an outright gift of it. So, another one of my favorite projects is the Harrington Schoolhouse. Another occasion of a gift. I had a local attorney call me one day and said that he had a client that had a 1/16 interest in some property in the Harrington area. It was about 20 acres, and it was actually an abandoned schoolhouse. So it's basically a one-room schoolhouse. And so this was a Mrs. Isadora Hunter who had this 1/16 interest, and she conveyed it to the land trust with the understanding that we would try to acquire the balance of the interest, and we did that. We actually did it with a grant through DNR, and I forget, I think it was about an $800,000 ultimate purchase, and then we had to decide what to do with it, because the school had been unoccupied for probably 25 years and was in a pretty bad state of repair. And there were some folks who said, there's no way to save it, we'll just have to demolish it and maybe erect a plaque talking about it. And again, an example of those spontaneous activities. People came forward and said, no, we want to preserve that and have it as a community gathering place. I got a chance to work with Mr. and Mrs. Paulson, Hank Paulson and his wife Wendy, who are just marvelous people, and they are the owners of Little St. Simon's and had an obvious interest in preserving the view from Little St. Simon's. But as we got into it, Cannons Point is just such a huge treasure. And part of what we do there is programming, because we think the best way to build a conservation ethic on St. Simon's is to have a beautiful property like Cannons Point, which is preserved, and have people experience that and engender in them an appreciation for the natural world. A big part of what we do are the volunteers, not just the volunteers who make financial contributions, but the people who work as docents. I guess one thing that's been cemented with me in this effort is the realization as to how many talented people there are on St. Simon's. I mean, they have backgrounds in everything from ornithology to archaeology to the environment, and so they have just come out of nowhere often and wanted to volunteer because they have the love for the outdoors and the love for what we're doing at St. Simon's. I mean, we have over 1,000 acres now, and we like to minimize the cost of stewarding that property as much as possible. So we have a volunteer stewardship committee that spends hours examining the management plans for each of our properties. They have talents that we couldn't afford to buy if we had to buy it. So it's just, yeah, let me mention two things that I certainly don't want to overlook. And the two organizations, one of them is our Live Oak Society, and Frances McCrary, when you interview her, will confirm this, that she and I talked one time about how great it would be if we could get 100 people to give us $1,000 a year. And now we have almost 400 people who contribute $1,000 a year every year. And we've had some of it that have done it for the full 20 years. So it's, again, just a remarkable evidence of how much importance people attach to it. The other event is our annual Oyster Roast. And we started that right after we began almost 20 years ago. And at our first event, we had 70 people. And now, this last one, I think we had close to 1,200 or 1,300 people, probably 150 volunteers. It, to me, is the most outstanding community event on St. Simon's. It's just incredible, the amount of volunteer work that goes into it, the amount of contributions by local restaurateurs who contribute to it. So it's just been really inspirational. So those are two great events that continue. We have an annual Live Oak Society event at the Cloister, and again, it's a chance for us to thank people, and we have sponsors for that event, so we try not to use membership dollars for it, but it's a way to thank people who make a really significant contribution to the land trust. I hope we will get more property owners to voluntarily down zone their property. The one project I didn't mention is we have some property out on the Frederica River that was zoned for 16 homes. We had someone buy it and voluntarily put a conservation easement on it and restrict the development to one home. So again, that's an example of a property owner voluntarily down zoning their property. To us, that is the way of the future. And in the long term, if we can convince property owners to do that, don't max it out with the maximum density. Leave some green space. It will enhance the value of the development and obviously be a huge benefit to St. Simon's. So really there are three elements of what we do. I think there's land acquisition, there's land management, and there's environmental stewardship and education. And that's sort of the three prongs of what we do. One story I like to tell is not too many years ago there was an article in Fortune magazine, I think it was called the 50 leaders of the country, and one of the interviewees was General Dunford, who at the time was Marine General in charge of Afghanistan and Iraq. And he was asked about his career, and he said that one of the things he remembers well is when he was a young captain, his battalion commander said, "I've got three keys to success that I'll tell you." He said the first is to surround yourself with good people. And then after a pause, General Dunford said, "Frankly, I've forgotten the other two." And that's the way I feel about the Land Trust, is we've been so fortunate to be surrounded by good people, and hopefully that'll continue in the future. It's always about the people, and I think what we do just attracts a very knowledgeable, very enthusiastic kind of folks, and those are the kind of fun people to be around.